Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. It's nice when childhood friends have the same good life. Andrew thought to himself as he drove up to the restaurant, where Walt was waiting for him. If Walt had been unsuccessful, what would they talk about? The rich can't be friends with the poor, even if they want to. It doesn't work. That's where envy and an involuntary demonstration of well-being come in. And what is worse than understanding that your friend, with whom you fished for moths in your childhood, is an ordinary lazy and weakling? Yes, Andrew has acquired several immutable beliefs by the time he is 35. The first and most important of these was that poverty is 8 times out of 10 due to laziness and lack of character. But fortunately, none of this was about them. With Walt, everyone rose in their own way. Andrew ran his own contemporary dance theater. Walt's business was darker. But in the end, it was the one that would stand in any crisis. Walt was the owner of a funeral home. Yes, it doesn't compare to the holiday atmosphere at the Andrew Theater, but it's a necessary business too. How do you stand it all? Andrew asked his friend. After all, every day you come to work, and there are coffins, a morgue, the makeup of the deceased live well, and your loved ones weeping in the ritual hall. It can make you depressed. Walt shrugged his shoulders in depression. Maybe you can. But personally, I prefer to fall into philosophy. People die, whether we want them to or not. Here at mine, workers do everything they can to see a person off to the next world with dignity and create as little trouble for their loved ones as possible. They can mourn their loss in peace. You don't have to think it's better to be distracted. Then you won't feel any pain. First, a lie. And second, feeling pain is important, Andrew. You know how it often is. A person pushes their grief inside, tries to drown it out with their worries, and then bam, and the asylum. Being able to grieve, it's just as important as knowing how to be happy. That's what I think. And we give those who have had that grief a chance to get through it without being distracted by things like finding a costume for the deceased, finding a makeup artist, or a place in a cemetery. Having listened to this speech, Andrew and his friend did not argue. There was nothing to argue about. Walt was right. It was just his almost philosophical truth that not everyone could accept. Just in case, Andrew decided not to talk to his friend anymore, but about his work. After all, they had enough topics in common as it was. Walt waited for him briefly over a glass of wine and a telephone conversation. He was probably dealing with some matters relating to his monstrous business, but when he saw his friend, he immediately hung up and became a healthy Andrew. The old friends embraced. "Look at you still in the gym," Andrew smirked. He poked his fist into the steel bicep of Walt's biceps and said, "You want to be young forever. What do I care about you? You're so good. Still went to college. I still can't make up my mind." Alas, Andrew sighed sadly. No one's getting any younger. You've got silver in your hair already, and I think you'll have a bald spot soon. It was a typical courtesy exchange, as no meeting was without it. After this introductory part, they were seated at the table. "Did you ask me here for nothing or on business?" Andrew asked. "But why do you ask?" "Of course, it's business. Otherwise, I would have come here for a visit." "Isn't that right? You'd have come for a visit, wouldn't you?" Walt smiled. "I have something to do with you, and it's strictly a man's business. There's no reason for your mother to know about it. You see, I met a girl a few months ago." Andrew snorted understandingly. "And now you don't know how to break up with her." But Walt shook his head. "No, I know that one." Then he began to tell the story slowly, in detail. And Andrew, listening to his friend, suddenly remembered their shared childhood. Walt had always been like that. He tried to consider every situation in detail, taking into account all the circumstances, and only then to decide something. There was no spontaneity in him. But he always made a very well-considered decision and rarely made a mistake. "Remember when I decided to take a vacation for Christmas?" Walt told me. I went to Thailand for 2 weeks. Beaches, clubs, beaches. So in one club I met her. Pretty girl, legs and breasts. A dancer, a stripper, Andrew clarified. Walt nodded. Well, you know how it is. They're at work there. It's forbidden to show sympathy. But I could see she was looking at me. She liked me. All right. I guess I don't have to. I'm a free man. I waited till she got home from work. That's how we met. Turns out she speaks English. Name's Nina. And of course, she didn't join this dance for the good life. That's where it all started. And then I told her, what do you want to be here for? Come with me. She said yes. I rented her an apartment, and everything was fine. For another month and a half. And then I realized it wasn't mine. Yeah, she cooled off too. I could see that. And it didn't start out that way for her. This isn't how she started. And it was boring and cold. Anyway, we should break up. I don't get it, Andrew. So break up. What's stopping you? Walt didn't answer right away. He drank more wine and thought about it. You see, he said finally, Nina is from a small town. The family is simple. I've shown her a beautiful life, and now I'm going to leave her. What will she do? She'll look for a richer daddy and end up in a dump. You know how it is, don't you? I'd really like her to have something to do, to live her life with dignity and self-respect. And then, you know, she'll find a good, proper guy. A family will be formed, she said, as a dancer that she always dreamed of dancing in some decent place. Maybe there's a place for her in your theater. Andrew thought about it. I'm more in the business. Walt, he said, Molly's in charge of the choreography. We seem to have a full company, but I'd rather have your Nina. Maybe we could get her into something like a corps de ballet, and then if she could prove herself. Walt smiled. I knew you'd say that. That's why I asked her to come. She's on her way. Suddenly, Andrew noticed a tall brunette in a red dress approaching their table. He stood up to meet her and could not say a word. Wonderful dark hair fell like waves on her shoulders, and her coffee-colored eyes, with raised corners, attracted, enticed. And the girl also had a magical beauty of golden skin. Was that her? Loosely, he asked Walt. That's her. The girl approached them and leaned in to kiss Walt's cheek. What Andrew noticed at that deep cleavage made his breathing quicken. Meet Nina, Walt said. This is my old friend Andrew. He runs the contemporary dance theater. The beautiful girl turned to Andrew and glanced at him from under her thick lashes. Walt told me her voice was soft and somehow intimate, as if she were not greeting the stranger now, but whispering to him in the bedroom between kisses. Me too, about you. He awkwardly hopped out from behind the table to pull back a chair for Nina. Let me take a seat. The girl thanked him with a smile, and that smile made Andrew almost physically feel sparks run through his body. This had never happened to him before. He didn't notice how anxiously his friend was looking at him, didn't notice the fact that the waiters were smirking quite visibly as they passed their table. You, Walt, said you were a dancer. Nina smiled sadly and lowered her gaze. I used to be a dancer, and then I just had to undress to the music. You couldn't even call it dancing anymore. If it hadn't been for Walt gently touching her benefactor's hand, I don't know how I would have gotten out of that swamp. He just saved me back then. I still don't know how much of a forfeit he paid to the bar owner for me. Let's not talk about that. Walt interrupted her. That's in the past. We're here to think how we can get you back to the dance, aren't we? Andrew, who had served like a spellbound man before, seemed to stumble over these words. Indeed, how to do it, by passing the log, is impossible. Then how should he be? Losing Nina, this bird of paradise, is nothing to lose. He must find a way to keep her to himself. Shall we think of something? He promised the girl. Tomorrow at, say, 11 o'clock. Come to the theater, show our choreographer, and together we'll think about what we can do for you. And now I must go too. Then went up Walt. A little you stay, ordering whatever you want. Let them put it on my account. They went outside, and Andrew was surprised to note that it was already dark. so he'd lost track of time altogether. But of course, he kept his eyes on Nina, where he could see anything. Molly must have waited. He muttered grudgingly, remembering Andrew's wife. Walt looked at him shrewdly. You have a great wife. Do you remember that? Okay, don't forget that. Andrew got wary. Was he so obviously in love that even Walt noticed? That's the last thing I need. What did you just say that for? He asked, trying to convey in his voice the surprise of a faithful husband who was suddenly suspected, unfairly of course, of being attracted to a strange woman. Walt did not hold back a chuckle. As a man to a man, I understand, he replied calmly. Anyone would fall for Nina. I've been there myself. But honestly, you don't want to get involved with her seriously. She's not worth a fingernail. Don't get angry. As a friend, are you trying to piss me off? Andrew grinned. Come on, I'm not stupid. I wouldn't trade my Molly for anyone else. Ok, see you later. I'll give my best to my wife for you. Nina picked the salad with a fork without interest and pushed his plate away. There was no appetite at all. That Andrew clearly had his eye on her. Now he will do everything to get her a job in his theater. Now it is important to play her cards right, to hold his attention correctly, and most importantly, to fuel his not stingy advances. Then soon she will be not just a pretty puppet, as she has been so far, but a significant, wealthy person. It was a pity, of course, that she would have to part with Walt. She liked him, but he was too independent. He wasn't easy to manage, but something told her that she'd have to pull the strings out of Andrew. And that was exactly what was required. Nina nodded to the waiter, remove the salad, and bring me with mushrooms, cream sauce, and another red wine of your choice. I don't know anything about alcohol. Anything else? The waiter politely inquired. Cucumber and tomato salad, shouted Nina. Greens and dressing. Don't ask silly questions and take my order. Her mood improved a little. Life is a zebra. Not long ago, she was stripping and living in a filthy doghouse at the back of civilization. Then she met Walt and now lives in a nice, albeit small, apartment dining at a restaurant. That's great. And when she realized she was losing interest in Walt's, she was no sooner upset when Andrew came along. And with him, she had a good chance of making it in the world. No, things were definitely shaping up very well. Nina took a sip of wine and smiled. Here was something to be tolerated in moderation of sweetness. And after all, it was at least some reminder of what living people eat and drink. Dancers have to watch their figure. But isn't that human? Eating just a chicken breast or a salad. In her youth, Nana loved fried potatoes, white bread and butter, and ice cream. All things she hadn't had in her mouth in 5 years. 1 chocolate chip cookie a day, and a glass of wine on the weekends. True, she would probably have to give up wine, too. Lately, it was worth it to have at least a little drink. I can't make any promises about the concert lineup, she said, but let them come and rehearse. We'll start with the corps de ballet. That's how he'll prove himself. Thank you, sweetheart, Andrew glowed. Then I got tired of sleeping, too. And only when he was alone, locked in the bathroom, could he finally relax and congratulate himself on his victory. Molly, apparently, did not suspect anything, even promised to help. Here, of course, was not without the mention of a magical military name. Yeah, well, childhood friendships either end with childhood or last a lifetime. But the important thing was that everything came together. He pulled off that dangerous conversation with his wife, and he won. Well, that's great. Good for him. Andrew realized that today he had not just managed to fool his wife. He had fulfilled his friend's request and at the same time got Nina in close proximity to him. Now she would be there for him. Oddly enough, he thought of her now calmly, without fever. This girl was so impossibly beautiful it seemed like a dream. Maybe tomorrow, when they would see each other again, he would wonder what he had found in that sweet but generally ordinary girl yesterday. After all, it was likely that daylight would reveal that she had a pimple on her forehead. or even a few. Andrew thought about it and hoped that was exactly what would happen. Never in his life did he think he would expect disappointment as well. But right now, it was the only thing that could help, because if tomorrow's meeting did not disappoint him, then how to live? Then about Nina again dreamed. Nightmare. She returns to her hometown, but finds its houses deserted. In the streets, familiar from childhood, stand with their windows open in the winter, and behind them is darkness and silence. And immediately it is clear that there is no one there, not a soul, only a screech. And in this courtyard is an old merry-go-round, spinning by itself, as if ghosts were riding on it. At this point, Nina always woke up and lay with her eyes open for a long time. Still hearing that frightening dead creak, that damned lucid dream wore out her nerves at intervals of about once every few months, and I couldn't get used to it. Tonight the nightmare was unusual. There were new details in it. As she walked through the empty city, Nina kept turning around. Someone was calling her name. She could not recognize the voice, though it sounded familiar. And then suddenly she realized that these responses were a vicious joke, to intimidate her completely, so that she could never leave this place. Then she decided to ignore them. But whoever came up with this prank was no fool either. Now she was distracted from all sides, and the voices that called to her multiplied, switched, giggled. Nina squatted down beside the very fiddler of the carousel and covered her ears with her hands. And then she woke up. I'm never going back there, she thought. Over and over she said that soothing mantra. And it usually worked. But today, something went wrong. Nina tangled in her blankets and went to the kitchen. Tea, the girl promised herself, was strong, with milk and sugar and cookies. She wanted to chase away that cold longing, the dream-inspired feeling, and to warm herself, to remind herself of the present troubled city outside the window, the chocolate chip cookies, about being all in the past. It's like you're here and not there, like Walt said, kind of in two worlds at the same time. Nonsense, she smiled. That he was right. Even she didn't want to admit it to herself. And that was how she lived her life. That was right. There was an outside world in which she had to know how to make something happen. And there was another world that Nina never told anyone about. In that secret world of hers, her beloved cat Pussycat was alive and running around the yard. There was a shaggy black cap in the bay. There the lumpen lion's call grew along the fence in the summer and in the winter, like down in blankets, snow. Nina, a girl from the suburbs in a sundress and barefoot hats, was working in the garden and peering at the gate. Soon her friend would pick her up, and together they would run to dance class at the local house of culture. That's where she had once met Zach after another concert. She hurried down the stairs and ran into an invisible wall when she saw him. How handsome was he! Blue eyes like the sea, which she hated only in pictures. He was so tall that she had to throw her head back to look at his face. Zach noticed this and went down a couple of steps. I saw you on stage, he said, smiling. The smile was so cocky that Nina laughed. Lies, because lousy does not lead an ear. What dress was I wearing? She asked, hoping to catch him. But the trick failed. The red one. The boy answered without stuttering. The flower was behind your ear. Right there. He jokingly tugged at her ear. Come on, let's go home. I'll walk her home. It's getting late. He threw his jacket over her shoulders, took her by the arm, and led her home like a little girl. It was so unusual and funny, but also very exciting. Did she hate the eager curiosity with which passing girls looked at Zach? She was walking down the street for the first time with a young man who was not her relative or classmate, walking just like a couple. Awkwardly, she joked, "So we are a couple," Zach replied, as if for him it was a matter of course. And then, when it was quite dark, they kissed for a long time right outside the gate of the innocent house, and the girl didn't care about the fact that now rumors would surely spread through their private sector. Let them talk. What does it matter if the most long-awaited adventure in the world has happened to you? Love. Within a week, everyone around them considered them both fiancé and bride. And after another month, Zach climbed over the fence at night and knocked on the sleeping bedroom window. "What? Not knowing when you're awake?" she asked. But seeing the pale face with drops of sweat on his forehead, Zach understood. Trouble happened. I lost the money. He barely got it out with quivering lips. The girl silently poured water into a mug and gave it to him. The boy greedily drank every drop. She still did not know what he was talking about. "Oh, and that's the end of it." Zach groaned, muffled, gripping his head. "What kind of fool are you, Mena? I have no money on credit. Now, if I don't pay it back, they'll cut everything into pieces." "All right." He took a breath and looked at Nina with sick, inflamed eyes. "Nina, I have to leave right now. Now you forgive me, okay, and forget it." "Wait," Nina touched his forehead and wiped away the sweat. "Wait, Zach, what do you mean forget it? How much money do they need?" "I'll get it." "Where am I?" In a whisper he shouted. "Where will you get it? Tell me, where?" "Well, we'll find somewhere." She threw off her nightgown, and in a minute she was standing dressed for the street. "Let's go," she called in a whisper. "Let's go out the window." The only man with money the girl knew was the choreographer at their dance group, Frank. Where did he get the money? No one knew that for sure. True, it was said that he made moonshine and sold it. But Nina didn't pay much attention to this talk. Moonshine existed outside of her world, and so did the people who needed it. "Frank," she knocked on the choreographer's window. There was a light on and voices coming from the room. "Is he having guests or something?" "Frank, is Nina?" Zach hissed something incomprehensibly. "Nina, yes, be quiet," she whispered at him. "Frank, I have business to attend to. I have no one else to go to." "Please." The window swung open. "But what do you want, Nina?" grudgingly asked the choreographer, standing here in the middle of the night under the windows of an honest man. "Frank, I need the money." Nina didn't hesitate to blurt it out unnecessarily. Men's laughter erupted in the room outside the window. Frank waved his hand carelessly at his guests, and everything fell silent. "I don't need much," the girl continued. "I need..." "Zach, how much do you need?" She looked over her shoulder, but did not see her friend. Zach shouted to the whole street, completely forgetting the time of day. "Zach, Zach." "Yes, there he was," calmly said the choreographer. Seeing how pale and shaky, the guy looked out from around the corner of the house. Frank with visible disgust, and looked at Zach's lanky figure, squabbling, black hair. "But you're an asshole. She's running around other people's houses at night, looking for money to borrow, and you're afraid to show your face in the light. Are you?" He turned to Nina. "He needs the money because of him." Nina nodded. "Wait a minute, I'll be right out. Come on, Nina." The boy tugged at her sleeve. She silently yanked her arm out. The door was open and Frank, dressed in his homemade tracksuit, walked leisurely out onto the porch. "And he's your maiden, you're my red one." He began to glare at the guy's haggard face. He didn't let it slip. "Who does he owe?" "No, that's all right. I'll tell you. He owes me, Nina. You're an idiot, not running around at night. You'd better go to bed. Nobody forced him to play. He's the one who messed up. Let him clean it up." "Frank, I'll work it out," Nina said firmly. "Do you want me to clean for you? I can cook and look after the garden. And you'll die of old age before you count with him." The choreographer poked his finger at your Zach's silent debt, and he'll make new ones in the meantime. What are you going to do for his foolishness? Do you even know what a card player Nina is? Listen, you take good advice. Go home to bed, lie down and forget. "Forget that jerk. I will not go," shouted her out. "Here you are, Frank. What do you have in your life? Besides a job, no wife, no kids. What about me? I know you have love. So why can't you see? Who have you fallen in love with? There's your beloved standing there. And he's cowardly. He's setting you up now. He's not thinking where he can get the money. And he's not offering to work it off. It's you. and he's standing there like a lamb of God, offended, breaking down, waiting for you to do everything for him. You are all right, aren't you? He cut himself off. You can't hear a damn thing. So this is how you want to help him. I'll send you abroad. I got a friend who runs a bar there. You'll work for him as a dancer. He'll give you a place to live. You won't have to pay for it. We'll split the salary, half for your living and half for your dog's debts. Do you agree? No. Make up your mind quickly. People are waiting for me. I agree, Nina blurted out without thinking. It was only later, on her way home, that she suddenly realized that now she had no way back. Soon she would be gone and long. For 2 years she would see neither these buns nor her room. And without her beloved, even the cat and dog she would not see. Zach walked silently beside me. I didn't really want him to encourage her, to say something nice to her, or at least to hold her hand. But he kept following the mushrooms, his feet, the gravel, and occasionally sighing heavily. Would you wait for me? Asked the girl timidly. He only sniffed his nose. Where can I go? Will I wait for you? Of course you will. You'll come back, and we'll get married. Nina smiled a little visibly. Married. Now it would be a little easier for her to get through these 2 years. It's always easier when there's something to look forward to. The gravel beneath their feet rustled a little too loudly for a summer night. The house she used to live in she gave to Zach, and not without a secret purpose. Let everything around it remind him of her. Nina hoped that her beloved would call her every day. But alas, there was a problem with that. She called more often, and then Zach talked me out of some urgent business. I got a reluctant job at the motor pool, he said into the phone. Well, I had to work. What to live on then? All right, Nina, I have to send the guys on a trip. While she could not help but feel that something was wrong. She wanted to leave everything and go home. But what was left of her salary was enough only for the meager food. The owner of Peter's bar smiled wickedly at her pleas for more pay. You see, I do not have zero profit and not a fig. Not a lot of customers. Only locals come. What do you take from them? You know how tourists make their living. And it's off-season. Where am I gonna scrape together? And then he lowered his voice. You figure it out. The other girls get wind that I'm paying you more. They'll ask for a raise. What am I, the oligarch prince of Denmark? I'm not. No, not Nina. You don't even come near me with that question. You want to have a drink on me. Let's call it a night. Fortunately, on their rundown bar came out some expensive Walt and saw a beautiful stripper in no time. Arranged everything with Peter a few days later. Nina was already pacing on the dusty nothing has changed here in 2 years. The road to her house. The gate was unlocked. Nina entered the yard and heard no cheerful barking. And the dog kennel was gone too. She stared confused, not recognizing her home nest, and did not immediately understand what had happened here. The black, charred hulk of a house was sticking out in front of her, and only the surviving porch appeared almost untouched by fire. 3 steps up them, and their halls. And on this porch she once loved to settle down with a mug of milk and a piece of bread. That porch was her own. Only now it led nowhere. You're back. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Nina looked around and saw her neighbor at the gate. Nothing had changed, and her aunt is still as round as ever. Nothing changes and everything changes. Hello. And what is it here? The woman sighed heavily and waved her hand. Can't you see the trouble? It was your Zach who set the fire when he was drunk. The whole street piled in. We barely put it out. We helped the firemen. And how he was walking around with some girls. Nina shuddered. And with whom? You're lying, aunt, and aren't you ashamed? A grown woman, but her neighbor wasn't embarrassed. Ask anyone you like. She made a wide gesture to the street. After you left, he started walking. And then, here you are. He burned down the whole house. And you say I'm lying. They say what they say. The girl interrupted her aunt. What? They say he married a rich woman. the daughter of the market director. She's fat. She doesn't need to be thin. What's wrong with eating with daddy's money? The whole town was buzzing at their wedding. The best restaurant. Zach was unrecognizable. He used to be a simple guy, but then he looks down at him through his lip and says hello, and this fat girl hangs on him. And he's all snuggled up to him. She remembered this fat girl from their dance group. A fat, clumsy girl who could not repeat even the simplest movements, but for some reason she was invariably included in the concert compositions and even given the leading roles. Of course, the girls whispered among themselves, but no one was outraged. Everyone knew who her daddy was, and they also knew that once a week on Saturdays, a car cut off by the directors of the market drove up to their house of culture and began the scheduled distribution of delicacies. The director, the choreographer, and even the janitors. Even the alcoholic janitor was not forgotten. She was sure to get 2 bottles of white and red wine, a few bottles of whiskey, and 10 bottles of beer. Such an island of abundance in the separate house of culture. And that's the fat girl who was married to her Zach. And she's the one who snuggles up to him. I can't believe it. I can't believe it, mumbled Nina. The neighbor just nodded. It's none of our business here. Believe it or not, you can't believe it. I tell it like it was. Daddy didn't even send them on their honeymoon. That's what my daughter said. You know she works at the airport. She saw them there herself and gave them the tickets. And now they have the same last name. And she saw the rings with her own eyes. I see, Nina answered dryly. Where did you fly to? The neighbor thought about it. I don't remember. I kind of do. But how is it a T word? I think it's the word Thailand. The girl prompted. Thailand. Thank you for the story. The woman looked after her. And they, strangely enough, met on the same day at the exit of the city. Nina stopped to refuel. Suddenly, she saw Zach in the next car. He turned, at her gaze, and his face contorted with annoyance. Motherfucker. It escaped from him. Nina, ignoring this peculiar greeting, nodded modestly. Hello, Zach. Good day to you too. I see you're back already. How did you like it in Thailand? It's not so hot there. And the insects can bite. Did your wife complain? No. He averted his eyes. Why are you doing all this? He asked me reproachfully. Why? Don't you understand anything? He sounded so tired and disappointed. I don't understand. Nina raised her voice. But I understand the other thing very well too. I understand that I've been wiggling my ass in front of drunks for almost 2 years to pay off your gambling debts. I also understand that I ate half a meal and lived in a room with cockroaches, but I thought it was all nonsense. My darling Zach is waiting for me at home. I know I was counting my cents. I'd forgotten all about sleepy rest, and I was thinking, I don't care. My darling's waiting for me at home, and my darling burned down my house, so I don't have a home anymore. And it doesn't bother my lover either. And why would he care about me? He doesn't have the same social circle as he did before. And he married someone else. Now that's what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? No, I don't understand. I've become stupid. Did I ask you to do that? He exploded. I asked you for it. Remember, you're the one who decided everything. And now it's my fault. You know what, Nina? It's your fault. Don't confuse me with that. You're a sacrificial sheep for the sake of your beloved. You traded your girl's honor. And he didn't appreciate it. I'm bursting into tears of injustice right now. Finished his furious tirade, Zach took a snow-white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead. You're making my blood pressure rise, he said pitifully. And you said you'd wait, said the girl. And her voice treacherously trembled. Told me I'd come, and we'd get married. Zach grinned cynically and harshly. Why is his face so still beautiful, young, ugly? And as if all at once it got old. What did you think I was supposed to say? That I didn't need a fucking bride? That the girl I loved at one point decided that stripping was a good thing? What's the point of marrying her? No respect for yourself. That's what I should have told you. All right, Nina, That's enough. We've talked, and we've had enough. Go where you're going." So that was the end of the story, Nina thought, as if it were not her first love, but a book. Nina never once allowed herself to cry, though the tears choked her all the way back. And then, when she was already sitting in the apartment she had rented and waiting for Walt, they met again, and again quite by chance. Nina and Walt were at the theater, and suddenly Nina caught someone's gaze on her from the next box. On closer inspection, she recognized Zach surrounded by his new family. The wife's parents, striving to look theatrical and therefore pompous to the point of ridiculousness. The wife was there, too, still as fat and thickly makeuped as before, except she wore more diamonds. She clutched her beloved husband's arm tightly, her glasses, and minute by minute. Then she corrected his hair, then reacted to invisible dust from his shoulder. She wasn't looking at the scene at all. Zach was clearly bored, except that he was gravitating toward the parade image. Every now and then his hand flew up to his throat to loosen the knot of his tie. Nor, as Nina noticed, was he used to the jacket. He kept fidgeting and tugging at his sleeves and couldn't get comfortable in any way. Once, taking his wife's hand away from his hair, he looked at his palm squeamishly. Yes, the social life was new to all of them. Walt leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Who's that guy?" "He's in the next box. He can't take his eyes off you." "Nonsense," she answered in the same whisper. "A classmate." At intermission, Nina left the box and immediately ran into Zach. It was as if he had been waiting for her there. Looking, he smiled. "You are not lost in this life. The social life of theater and ballet has found its place in the big city. I wish you to do the same." Carelessly said the girl. Zach remained unperturbed. "Who is that with you in the box?" "Daddy." "He's all right, but he's a little old. You're losing your touch. At least he doesn't limit you in terms of money." "Spoiling. No less than you are spoiled by your mumps. By the way, are you living well under her watchful eye? I hope you haven't made any new debts." Zach cringed at those words, and Nina noticed how nervously his fingers moved along the row of buttons on his jacket. "So in debt again." "Satisfied," the girl said, and went back to her puddle. And late that night, Zach, frankly drunk and miserable, began to tear off her phone. "I didn't want to marry her." He bristled into the phone. "Can you believe it? Nina even thought about running away. But her father has money. You know what I am. The gambler who burned down my house." Nina coldly chided me. Yes, I was so ashamed in front of you. You did it for me, and I couldn't wait for you. And I couldn't keep up with the game. You know how I sit down to play. That's it. I think I'm in luck now. I'll get you on the first plane to Thailand, and we'll get married." "Nina, can you hear me, Nina?" "I hear you," she answered. "And then when I got married, I was afraid to meet you. I was so ashamed that I had nightmares about you. My wife took me by the scruff of the neck and took me to the shrinks. I spent a month in the asylum. They all examined me, twisted me around, and gave me some pills, but the dreams did not stop. I just stopped being afraid of them. And that was it," she grinned. "Then they let me out, though. And how did I smell that I was about to see you? I walked around, scared of my own shadow. Thought you might pop out of any corner. We met at the gas station. Nina, don't believe what I said back then. It makes me sick to think about it myself. You know, here's the most important thing. Remember, I only loved you as much as I could, but you alone." He finally passed out. Maybe his phone just ran out of juice, and Nina was relieved to get off the phone. Loved, disliked. What difference does it make now? There was nothing left. No more love, no home to return to, nothing but nightmares. But ever since then, there had been a fierce hatred in her heart for rich people who hadn't known the humiliation that had befallen her. If I had had a lot of money back then, she often thought, she wouldn't have had to go to Thailand. I wouldn't have needed the stripping and the nightmare of returning to my hometown, where no one wanted me. And would Zach dare treat me like that? But yes, he turned out to be a bastard. That's true. But if I'd been a rich Chico, I wouldn't have known about it. We'd have been married, and he'd have carried me around his whole life like he carries his fat girl now. It would have been nice to be back there in a different way. A rich man who wasted money left and right. Then he would come crawling to me on his knees and begging me to forgive him. But it became impossible to work, Molly complained. Her husband looked up from his papers. Molly in the theater has always respected the chain of command and never broke into the office of her husband, bypassing the secretary. And the fact that she called him by his first name, not Andrew, already said that the wife can barely contain herself. "What is Molly?" he asked, patronizingly. "Sit down, maybe a coffee. Would you like some?" "Listen, Andrew," she said in a voice ringing with anger. "I took this young lady to the company, as agreed in the corps de ballet, but she is an hour late for every rehearsal. She is rude to the choreographers and acts like a prima donna. I'm not even talking about her physicality. She moves clumsily. Okay, well, that can be fixed, but it takes work. You have to work, Andrew, not wait." Anyway, Molly finally sat down in the chair she was offered. "I don't know what we're gonna do with her. She's mean to the girls. She's already had 2 fights in the locker room, but I've already talked about them. Recently, the day before yesterday, I was literally walking up the stairs. There was a cleaning lady mopping the floors, and that woman with a swing kicked the bucket and went on happy. The whole bucket of dirty water. Andrew, what do you suggest? Fire her?" Molly shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know. Let's fire her. Walt might be offended. Leave it at that. But no, you can't do that either. I've been exhausted for 2 months. I mean, we have a premiere coming up, and it's taking half of my energy to get Nina to behave. I'm just so tired. And then you know as well as I do, if there is such a person in the team, everyone hangs around. One lousy sheep spoils the whole flock." Andrew listened to his wife, nodding in time with her words. "But well," he said conciliatorily, "let me try to talk to her myself. Maybe at least she will hear me. What do you say?" "But I wouldn't count on much if I were you." Molly got up and went to the door. "Send her to me," Andrew asked. "Okay." Nina appeared in a couple of minutes and floated into the office swaying her hips, which immediately threw Andrew in the heat. "What kind of girl is that? Everybody goes to rehearsal dressed up. They're just plain. Look at them." The scarlet t-shirt stretched so tight on her chest that it is not likely to crack. And these pants are hers. Everything that can and cannot be seen too. A hooligan kitten, Andrew smiled. He moved closer to hug the girl. This idea was not to his liking. "Your room mouse told me that you want to see me," she said, taking a seat in the chair. Molly corrected her Andrew. "All right," agreed the girl. She threw off her shoes and put her feet up on the table. "Your room mouse, Molly said you wanted to see me. What was that for?" Andrew put his palm over the girl's bare feet. "You can't be so careless, Nina," he said. "And if someone hears you, let him hear you," she said. "We've been together for 2 months now. Andrew, it's time to stop hiding in corners, especially since everyone around us has been guessing for a long time. It's not time yet. We've already done that to you." And then she pouted her already puffy lips. "Well, she's always bossing everyone around. I understand she's your choreographer, an important bird, all that stuff. But I'm not a ponytail either. I'm your favorite woman, aren't I? Am I or aren't I?" "That's right, honey, that's right." But he stroked her leg. "How do I explain it to her?" "Aren't you ready for a divorce?" she asked. "No," Andrew admitted. "And it's not about you or even her. It's just that I have invested so much in this theater, and in the divorce Molly and I have to share it." Nina poked her with good reason. Wow, what tenderness. He was quick to correct his mistake with Molly. "But it doesn't matter. Kitten, whatever you want to call her. What's important is what I mean, and you might end up without a theater. That's something to think about, and don't think it will have any effect on our income." The girl yawned defiantly. "Honestly, I'd rather stay with Walt. He may be a mortician, but he's a free man without any wives or other pets." "Nina," Andrew said reproachfully, but she didn't seem to hear him. "What's there to catch? Your fool always walks around with his lips pressed together, and all he does is browbeat me. You're a coward for nothing, you divorced coward. So what's the point of me sticking around? And in the Corps de Ballet? No, Andrew, what do you want? I think I'll get out of here. There's no prospects here. Nothing but nerves." She stood up, stretched out, cat-like, and agile. "Don't call me Nina." Andrew grabbed her hand. There was pity in his eyes. Despair, not zero. "Wait, let's talk. What do you still do? Not go away, kitten. Do not leave me." "I agree. Fool, I created this situation. How do I get out of it? I don't know. But give me time. I'll figure it out. Please, Nina." Never before had he felt so helpless and pathetic. Never before had he had to beg anyone for anything. "I'll figure it out, Nina. You just wait a little while longer, and then you and I will be together." She looked at him, not hiding a contemptuous smile. "Andrew, I saw it. I understood it, and he didn't care. Let him despise her. Let him not consider her a man at all. I don't care if he doesn't think of me as a human being. The warmth of her skin, those soft lips. All this became a drug to him, without which life lost all meaning. I've never loved anyone as much as he loved you. All kinds of things happened to me. There were good things and bad things. But to go crazy over a woman like that, I can't be without you. So what if you left me? Then why should I live?" "Fool," she said almost fondly. "What will change in a week, a month, even a year? You'll still be shaking with fear for this theater, from your wife to Cipher without end. I don't want to. I'll think of something." Andrew said it again. "You just wait a little longer, a little longer. Wait a little longer." Nina walked out of the office and almost bumped into Molly. Andrew was already relieved. The dancer shook her head tiredly. "No, and it's a hell of a lot easier to know when he'll be free of you. Although I personally would not mind. Molly, you are astonished at nothing. Now you also show up drunk at work. I'll talk to Andrew right now. Agree with who you want. Talk to your brains, if you have any, of course. I'm sick of it," barked Nina. "If you're so blind, and you can't see that Andrew loves me, and you're already there for him." She walked past, hitting her rival hard with her shoulder. "Will I never set foot in your theater again?" She shouted goodbye. "You are here on your own without me, and I will not be lost." Molly remained standing in front of her husband's office door. No, lies and hypocrisy. To say that she didn't notice anything. She could understand the reasons why Andrew even went to the shower with his phone. And these sudden absences from the house, supposedly for an hour to check in and dragging out into the dead of night. Of course, he guessed, but she preferred not to dwell on her suspicions. After all, thinking and knowing are not the same thing. The one thing she could never assume was that her husband was having an affair at work somewhere on the side. Yes, it was possible. But to be so blatant, right in front of her nose, Molly slowly turned around and never looked into Andrew's office, wandered to the exit. As always, in moments of serious turmoil, she wanted only one thing, to be home as soon as possible. Andrew, hearing and deleting the steps, sighed with relief. He was sitting at his desk, looking at the message from his mistress. "I've figured out a way to set us up. Meet me in half an hour outside the drugstore across from the theater. I'm waiting. I won't be late." Molly wasn't at all eager for her husband to return from work. In fact, she hoped he would be late again. She had never been good at settling up, and she didn't like to. Come to think of it, did she ever have a reason to? No, she hadn't. And now there was. What should she tell her husband? "Darling, I know that you have confused everything with another. And if he denies everything, it's easy. Or is the other option even more idiotic? Andrew, do you have a mistress?" I do. It's Nina. Yeah, that's her. What are we talking about? The rest was a complete mystery, or else her thoughts she was interrupted by a phone call. Molly mechanically picked up the phone. Yes, hello. We're sleepers. Nina's voice on the other end of the line was surprisingly upbeat. Well, what do you understand, dumbheads, that he does not care about you and will not, as long as a woman like me near him? You're not next to him, snapped Molly. But Nina only had another ringing laugh. That's for now. But it won't be long now. Okay, I'm sick of you, show loser. And Nina hung up. Molly chuckled unexpectedly to herself. Everything that was going on, this conversation, her unbridled rudeness, it was all so absurd, involuntarily laughing. And Molly laughed a long time at the top of her voice, until suddenly tears were pouring from her eyes. Luckily, Andrew hadn't come yet, and Molly didn't need to lock herself in the bathroom to cry in peace. Her life with her husband could not be called happy, but she was not unhappy either. Since childhood, Andrew was as if charged with success, an excellent student, and the only gold medalist in their class. Athletic dancing, track and field. He always read a lot about high school. He was the first to go to preparatory courses, and he did it not by choice and insistence of his parents, but by himself. And that's why Molly always liked not him, the ideal schoolboy, and the embodiment of the dream of parents and teachers, and the raucous and cheerful Walt. They had been friends since early childhood, Andrew, Walt, and Molly. Andrew often joked that he remembered his wife even earlier than he remembered himself. In their trinity, Andrew was the most serious, Walt was the bravest, and Molly was the most beautiful part of the company. They were never bored together, and surprisingly, their tight circle. All three were carefully guarded from outsiders. For many years, in fact, since kindergarten and preschool graduation, no one had ever managed to join their company. And then it rang. Last call, and Walt left. Molly experienced his departure as a real tragedy. She never told anyone that she was in love with Walt. Since 8th grade, even her mother, and after graduation, he stunned her with the announcement that you were probably going away for good. Andrew wasn't very surprised by that for some reason. They must have discussed it without her. Molly decided that she would be sure to come to the train to see Walt off and at least open up to him as they said goodbye. She got up awfully early that morning. That was all. Only to have her hair properly styled, to choose the right dress, and to have time to do her makeup. She really wanted Walt to remember her as beautiful, very beautiful. Andrew had promised to pick her up at 9:30 in the morning, but he called at 8. "Did you get a good night's sleep?" he asked cheerfully. "Well, don't cry. Walt is not angry. He said to say hello." "Hi," said Molly, confused. "You said he had a 9 a.m. train. I'm all packed, just waiting for you, but you're the one who's overexcited. I told you several times that Walt decided to go by night." Andrew laughed into the phone. "No, you really got it all wrong." "Yes, I did, Andrew. I even had it written down," she argued, in general, well aware that now it all does not matter. Walt was gone anyway. "You know what? Go to bed," suggested Andrew. "You've gone completely out of your mind with these exams. You need to rest, Molly. You're in a hurry. You'll be fine. I'll pick you up tonight." "Yeah, we'll go out." Molly hung up and looked fiercely at her reflection in the mirror. How pathetic it seemed to her to try to dress up. The hair, the dress, the slightly tinted lips. Now it all seemed like a rejected gift. The kind that long and carefully chosen, tried to reddish packaging. And when it was time to hand it over, it was glimpsed and sent to the general pile with the card and all the silly souvenirs. Walt was gone. We could wash up. Molly laid down on the bed and cried into her pillow. In the meantime, Andrew ironed his comb and his hair and left the house. It was 8:40 on the clock. He still had time to get to the train station and see his friend off. Andrew didn't stay anywhere late that evening. He entered the apartment and shouted cheerfully from the threshold, "Molly, I am at home. Where are you?" She was about to say she was in the kitchen, but changed her mind. "He'll come himself. Molly, are you asleep? What's the miracle?" He looked into the bedroom, and not finding his wife there, muttered something resentfully. "Trey." Finally, it was her turn to the kitchen. "Ah, there you are hiding." Andrew was delighted. "And why do not you answer? I've been calling you. I've been looking all over the house. Look, a surprise." He deftly gestured as a magician took a box of chocolates tied with a huge bow from behind his back. "It's your favorite. I know. You can't have any candy. You have to keep in shape. And that, by the way, is correct." But they caught my eye, and I couldn't resist. Molly nodded and thanked him for the gift. "Let's drink tea." Andrew put the cup in front of his wife and untied the bows on the box of Fitz himself. "Once in a couple of months you can forget about the figure. Really, come on, a couple of candies won't do you any good. Your mistress called today." Without lifting her eyes from the table, Molly reported. Her husband hummed as he poured the tea. "Oh my. Which one?" "I've had about 8 or 12 of them in the last week. I don't remember exactly." "Stop clowning around," she said. "Please, your Nina." Molly did take the candy and distractedly bit into it. To go on talking about everything she had to hear today from the cheeky girl. It was all proving to be too much to bear. "Nina," Andrew muttered in amazement. "Wait, are you saying that you think that I have a relationship with Nina? With her?" He leaned back in his chair and laughed loudly. "But honest, noble Molly," he squeezed out between bursts of laughter. "If you're going to do this, why has Nina already done it with you?" I expected more imagination. "Because my wife replied in a steady voice. She spoke to me today." And Molly waved her hand in the air. "Andrew, there's something in my eyes. Help me. I can't get to the bed by myself." Her husband ran to her and helped her up. "Come on, Molly. Come on. It's dark." Molly woke up from the cold. Quoth the dreadful mumbling she, "Andrew, would you turn the heat on and give me a blanket? It's completely blowing." No one answered her, and that was a shame. "Jesus," Molly grumbled grudgingly, too. "Why is it that when there's a need, there's no one? And when she didn't have to, no one?" She opened her eyes, threw back the sheet, and sat up in what Molly didn't recognize as her bedroom. White coffee walls, white coffee floor. She was sitting on a hospital gurney, and next to her was another person lying on top of her. Head to toe was covered with a sheet. Even her face was covered. "What a nightmare," she muttered. "This is a dream. Just a dream. What kind of a dream?" In the silence, her quiet voice sounded deafening. It sounded as if it were bouncing off a wall and resonating. "What on earth is Andrew? Andrew. My God, what is it? What am I, in a morgue?" Molly jumped off the gurney, hit the one next to him. It was only now that I realized everything and clutched my palm so I wouldn't scream in horror. A human hand fell out from under the sheets to the rescue and dead skin. Molly rushed to the locked door and drummed her fists into it. "Open up, who is in there? Hear me. Open so that I am alive. Open immediately." Someone behind the door. There were hurried and footsteps. The door swung open. Scared to death, a young guard looked at Molly with dilated eyes. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" "We'll find out." She swept past him in a hurricane. "Call his supervisor. Call right now and shut this morgue down. For God's sake." Molly looked around. She'd seen it all before somewhere. "Okay, familiar interiors. Walt, he's the boss. Well then, call him right now and tell him that Molly has been locked in the refrigerator." "What Molly you tell them? He'll figure it out. Call him." The boy, still awake, was batting his eyes and pointing his finger at the numbers on the screen. At last the ringing was long and Molly stopped pacing from corner to corner. "What a showcase," she said to the several coffins displayed along the walls of the roof. "Funny business, your boss guy said." "He's on his way," mumbled the guard. "Were you asleep?" Molly asked menacingly. I didn't see anyone here. He wrinkled his forehead funny. I'd have noticed, but the morgue has a back door that skids in from there. I see, she sighed. Do you have any tea? I was lying in the morgue, not on the beach. Walt arrived half an hour later and froze in place at the sight of Molly. She stood still frozen, pale, and furiously rubbed her palms together. You know, he said confusedly, I'd hoped to the last that this was all some silly prank. I wish I thought so. Walt, what's going on? I'm so lost, I don't understand it at all. Walt walked over to her with his jacket and put his arm around her shoulders. Let's go into my office. Sit down and have some coffee. So far, I do not understand anything myself. What about you? You don't remember anything at all. How did you get here? But I was home. Then Andrew came in and we had tea and talked. And then Walt. She stared at her friend in shock. Walt, I think I'd figured it out. Andrew brought a box of chocolates. We drank tea with candy, Walt. So, he didn't get it. What does that have to do with it? I ate candy, just one, and I got dizzy, even in my eyes. One day, I asked Andrew to help me to the bed. The candy, there was something in it. You know now. Well, okay, let's say, nodded Walt. So you got dizzy, and you went to lie down. How did you end up here then? Molly covered her face helplessly with her hands. I don't know. I don't know anything, Walt. Maybe I'm just crazy already. He stroked her head sneakily. I thought of something. I'm going to drive over to your house now. Don't. There, maybe, there you should with a slight pressure, he said. I have to. Tell me, who else can I meet there? Molly lost her forehead. Well, it's Nina. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't mean to. Anyway, Andrew, Nina, I see. Don't go on. Walt interrupted. I got the gist of it. Molly shook her head. How ridiculous, shameless it all is. She looked up tiredly at Walt, and then suddenly smiled. What did you need it for then? Leave by the night train. Maybe if I had come to see you off, everything would have turned out differently by the night train. He asked me again in surprise. I left by the morning train, and I was very disappointed that you did not come to say goodbye. Andrew told me you had caught flu. You're lying down with a fever. Andrew said, what flu? What fever? I woke up in the morning. I was doing my best to make you remember me this beautiful. And then Andrew called and scolded me for not seeing you to the train. He also said that I mixed up what you told me about the night school, so he just didn't want us to meet. Right. But why, Walt? I mean, the three of us were always together. And Walt suddenly remembered the very last summer they shared, when Molly's parents had taken her to the seaside, and he and Andrew were 17-year-old boys going to Walt and Grandma's country house. There they had everything they needed without the sky above their heads. And there were green forests and bodies of water all around. Want to go fishing? Want to swim? Friends quickly went about their chores, built a fire on the shore, fried fish on it, and swam in the lake without end. I bet I swam over, bragged Walt, for $5 round trip. Or let's race with the swim. Sit down already. Andrew laughed, had enough to eat and decided to go in the water. Suicidal, or what? Come on, Andrew, just admit that you don't have the guts. Walt, as always, was a gambler. And Andrew, knowing this, was genuinely amused, looking at his friend. I have a weakness. He didn't deny it. I'm in over my head, and you're kind of in over your head. Walt flashed the time indignantly. I got it. He ran into the water, raising a fountain of splashing. Andrew looked with the most serious look at the clock, then at the flickering and already in the middle of the lakehead of his friend. Swim back. Suddenly, he shouted with sudden alarm. He himself couldn't explain why he was suddenly so afraid. Walt could swim as well as any dolphin. And how many times they had swum across the lake. One at a time, and one at a time. I couldn't count. But Andrew was suddenly cold, as if he'd been covered with hoarfrost in the middle of a summer night. Walt. No one answered him. Get back. shouted Andrew. He was scared out of his wits. Go back, Walt. He was already rushing to the water, not stopping shouting and calling for his friend. He knew it was useless. He could not stop shouting and calling for his friend. He could only make it in time. He swam, and it seemed to him that the lake water, familiar since his childhood, was now as sticky and viscous as honey. It was hard to force his way through, and his shoulders ached inhumanly from the strain. Hold on, Andrew whispered. Sail toward the middle of the lake, where he had last seen Walt. Hang on. He took in more air in his chest and dove in. Almost immediately something shiny came under his arm. He clenched his hair tightly in his fist and jerked it to the surface. Walt inhaled loudly and convulsively. The jerk hissed Andrew, almost drowned to hell. He swam, supporting his friend, and then pulled him out onto the sand. And the whole time, every second, he desperately wanted to punch Walt in his insolent face. Except the face was so pale and frightened, he couldn't get his hand on it. Cramp? He asked. Walt smiled smugly, and his eyes danced with laughter. No. The mermaid dragged him to the bottom. Did you see what she had? He gestured at the parts of the mermaids whose bodies he was particularly impressed with. At this point, Andrew could not stand it, and his friends laughed together. Yes, so loudly that they scared off a bird in the bushes. Thank you, friend, said Walt, humbly. You saved my life. Now I owe you one. Andrew silently patted him on the shoulder. They came back to this conversation almost a year later, just before graduation. Remember, shall I continue? Andrew asked, as if in passing. But then at the lake, Walt forgave, looked at him. I remember, forget such a thing. Then continued Andrew, give in to Molly. I know you have a soft spot for her, but it's not like I'm playing games. I want to marry her. Walt put his head down. You don't have the hots for her. Andrew, the guy's tactful. I didn't mean to say that. I know you love her. You do. What can you do against first love? He wanted to tell Molly, and he was afraid to. But how dare she send him away with all her tender feelings? Could it be? Surely it can. But all the same, deep down in his heart, Walt cherished the hope that one day they would be able to talk frankly, and maybe even Molly would be able to reciprocate his feelings. And now it has happened. Andrew didn't take away that hope, and he didn't take it away in general. He just knew that his friend owed him. So he demanded a return. A thought flashed through his mind. But was he a friend? Walt knew for sure that he would save Andrew. He would never remind him of that. The thought was too frightening, and Walt rushed to push it away. Duty is duty, isn't it? In a whisper, Andrew reminded him. Walt turned away. I'll be gone after graduation. Briefly, he promised. Molly began to go to my place together, she said. I have new questions for my husband. It was mean, what he did. He knew everything, and he did it. How is that fair? And I was waiting to hear from you. And then Andrew told me you had a girlfriend here. What's with the wild romance and the confusion on Walt's face? She guessed that this was another trick of her husband's. And then sadly she finished. I decided that that was it, so the train had left the station, and I agreed to go out with Andrew. Then she married him. Walt sighed and took Molly's palm in his. I'm sorry, he said, running his fingers over hers. I'm sorry I brought Nina to you. If it wasn't for that, come on. Molly brushed it off. But it wouldn't have been Nina. It would have been Cindy, Nellie. You don't know who it would have been. Your Nana only brought out what was hidden. Like litmus paper. Remember in high school when they showed it to us in the window in chemistry? It would immediately change color. That's exactly how she's a reagent. Andrew, that's the same piece of paper. Well, we're sitting down. Let's go. No, Walt firmly contradicted her. If we want to find out what happened to you, I must go alone. In the meantime, you wait for me here, okay? There's tea, coffee, and cookies or something. You want to put on a movie and wait for me. I'll be back soon, but in the meantime, there's something you need to remember. I think they were trying to get rid of you. Doesn't that feel weird to you? It's not strange to me. If you and Andrew had just divorced, you'd be entitled to half of everything you'd managed to gain, and that didn't suit anybody who wanted to get everything. Andrew wouldn't have me. Maybe she would. But in order to find out the whole story, we have to get them to tell us themselves. And that's why we're going to act like this. Look, Nana stretched across the marital bed and smiled sweetly, smiling at Andrew. But isn't this a great idea? In just a couple of hours, your scumbag will wake up. You'll take her home, and she'll tell everyone that she woke up in the morgue. That's a lot of bullshit. Next thing you know, psych ward, insanity plea, custody, and then you're free. And most importantly, the theater will belong to you alone. Molly hoarsely asked him what will happen to her. Andrew Rapture's mistress did not share. On the contrary, with each passing minute, he felt more and more keenly that something terrible had happened. The worst thing that happened was not without his active participation. How could he do such a thing? The disability pension. Nana laughed. What could happen to her? We'll find her some cozy boarding house with a forest, nearby with a river, and make sure that she is properly cared for. She could live another 50 years in peace and quiet. It's a lot of people's dream. If you want to know, maybe there will be some kind of amateur group. See, it's a good thing I made myself a copy of the key to Walt's new afterlife in time. But don't you think I'm adorable? She held out her arms toward him. Well, come to me. Andrew grinned wryly, but didn't take a step toward the girl. Somehow he was horrified today. His wife did not interfere, and tomorrow, to take over the theater, she would quickly think of how to get rid of him. And she will. There was no doubt about it. Suddenly he remembered how, about a couple of weeks after Nina came to the theater, his wife complained to him that their company was going through a run of bad luck. I don't know what the problem is. One of the leading dancers hit by a car very close to the theater. Now the girl lay with fractures in the stretch, and there was absolutely no one to replace her because half of the ballet girls had some kind of weird allergy. Girls with red spots all over their bodies lined up at the dermatologist. Probably something in the concert clothes in the fabric, the doctor said. The girls overdid their costumes with their powder, but a day later their strange ailment returned. They'd brushed themselves to blood. Almost hysterically, Molly kept saying, "The concert dress is all open. How to let girls like that on stage, and no one at all on the leading part. But then, maybe not give a chance to prove themselves," he suggested. After all, she's the only one who isn't itchy yet, and her feet aren't hurt. I'll try. Maybe she's on the emotional edge, and she'll say something. Molly, of course, sighed and read, but finally agreed. True, Nina then showed nothing but laziness. After somehow this performance, Molly returned her to the corps de ballet. Andrew was terribly upset about it, especially because Nina walked around angry for 2 weeks straight and barely spoke to him. Why did he bring it up now? Were you the one who had gone after the girl? He asked in a low whisper, glaring at him. I thought you'd have figured it out sooner. What was there to do? You think your inadequate Cinderella would have given me the lead. But you could have, couldn't you? He was interrupted by the doorbell. On the threshold stood Walt, and you hear as Andrew, not before he cautioned, threw up his hand. I went to pick up some papers today, and the orderly said there was an unidentified woman frozen in the morgue. I went to look and recognized Molly, which Andrew shouted wildly. Walt, are you lying? After all, she's the one. You're lying. I'm not lying. Sadly, answered Walt. She died of hypothermia. I don't know what to say, Andrew. Nana stiffened like a stone statue on the threshold of the bedroom. Andrew called softly to her, but he lunged at her with a twisted, wild rage on his face. You wouldn't call it a sting. Walt piled on behind her, pulling his friend away from the girl. It was all her screaming, Andrew. She made the whole thing up. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to kill her. What the hell are you talking about? Shouted Walt at the both of them. What have you done? Did she? She told me it wasn't dangerous. She said. Walt looked at Nina. What did you do? It was all your idea." The girl shook her shoulder. "And why the hell should I live like a beggar?" "Because that coward is afraid to divorce his gray mouse." "What are you looking at?" "Yeah, it was my idea. I convinced that slug that his broad wasn't swinging from the cold. Would he have agreed if he'd known?" Andrew perked up. "What's going to happen to all of us with me now?" "Walt, I really didn't mean to, but don't you believe me?" "Walt, I didn't mean to." Of course, Nina grinned contemptuously. He didn't want to. He wanted the theater, Molly at home, and me at night. Didn't he? Walt moved involuntarily away from the girl. She was so repulsive to him that he was afraid she would hurt him, even with the edge of her dress. Walt collapsed to his knees. "Andrew, don't ruin it." "What do you do now, Walt?" "What to do?" "Shut up," said Walt. "Stop whining, it's not gonna help. Let's all go to the morgue and get the bodies before daylight. Dump them in the river. You never know what could have happened." "Thought I'd go for a swim." My leg cramped up. And that's what a professional Andrew would believe. He was sitting on the floor with his fingers in his hair. No, you can't do that." Who would believe it? There was no other way out anyway. Cut Walt off. And in a couple of days he would report his wife missing, while this and that would be found. "Get up, Andrew, get up, and let's go too." He looked at the girl, to me. "Yes, and you." Jumped to his feet. "Andrew, did you make all this up? And now you want to get off?" "No way." Into the car, all quickly lost patience. "Walt." They drove for a long time in silence, broken only by my sobs and Andrew. He was scared. Only now did he realize how right Walt had been when he had warned him against getting involved with Nina. It would cost him his life. That's what he'd said at the time. He hadn't listened. He thought he did, blabbing to Walt out of jealousy. Turns out Nina is a monster who has completely subjugated him and made him a murderer. "I hate you." He exhaled, looking at the scoundrel. "I hate you, this one." The girl smiled. Her usual composure had already returned to her, and she was no longer acting like one. "Once you realize how much trouble I've saved you, no need to fray nerves in court to divorce, to divide property." "Shut up," shouted Andrew. "Shut up. You're a murderer." "Both of you shut up," said Walt from his seat. "Both of you." It was bright in the funeral home. "The morgue is on the right down the hall," Walt said. "She's in there." In a trembling voice, Andrew asked, "Not in the morgue?" The door to Walt's office swung open, and Molly stepped in. "Good night, you bastards." It all worked out. Walt, of course. He took the recorder out of his pocket. "It's all there. I think it's more than enough to send them off to places not so far away." "No," whispered Andrew, against the wall. No. He shook and fell to his knees. He crossed himself finally, muttering as if to cast a spell of his own. No, without me." Suddenly, Nina laughed and rushed across the hall to the door. Molly gasped. Walt shook his head. "Don't worry about it. The police are already out there waiting for it." He nodded in disgust at Andrew, who had given up crossing himself and muttering, and now just howled softly, swaying from side to side. "There's no need to keep him. Come on in, get it ready. What's going to be a little audible now?" Molly muttered, as Andrew sobbed with the brush again, mumbling something. They took him out of the bureau. "What will Walt do now?" He put his arm around her, stroking her shoulder. "Now you need to sleep it off. That's the first thing. I'm not going home." "Go, Molly. I don't want to go there ever again. It's not my home anymore." "Then let's go to my place," Walt said. "You take a bath, hurry up, and we'll figure out how to get on with our lives. And you sleep on the couch, like at the best of times." Walt winked at her. And then they drove through the crazy city night. Walt purposely took his time, because they had so much to talk about. And suddenly Molly, for the first time in years, felt really happy, because there was a road to travel and Walt was always so safe and easy to be with at the end of this nighttime journey. And Walt and the possibility to sleep it off were waiting for her. Does it take much to be happy?